everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How are you all doing? I'm going to keep this intro short, even shorter than usual. It's raining terribly out. A rare rain here in sunny Los Angeles. It's 11:30 at night. I still have to take Mabel out. Naomi is asleep. Why do I leave these intros until the last minute? Who knows? But what I do know is that today is a great episode. This is Carey Mercer of Frog Eyes. And if you don't know who Carey is, why don't I read you his bio right now. Originally from Wakangan, British Columbia, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Carey formed the band Frog Eyes in the early 2000s out of the ashes of his former band, Blue Pine. From 2003 until 2018, they wrote and released almost a dozen albums and EPs on labels like Absolutely Kosher and Dead Oceans. And in that time, Carey also released a number of solo albums, as well as with the supergroup Swan Lake, featuring Destroyers, Dan Behar, and Wolf Parade's Spencer Krug. In 2018, Frog Eyes disbanded, but 4 years later, they're back with a new album, The Bees, which is out on Paperback Records. If you're downloading this the day it comes out, it is next Friday that this comes out. And as usual, it's a fantastic album. I've been listening to it a lot while I've been writing this one script, and I love it. I've been a fan of Carey's music for, I don't know, since I first heard Frog Eyes' first album? Oh, this was so long ago. It was grad school, so whatever came out around like 2004-ish. Anyway, you don't need to know that. I don't know why I feel like I have to prove my bona fides. Bona fides? Oh boy. My pronunciation's really, You know what? I'm going to say this was a wonderful talk. Carey's a thoughtful dude, and I hope you enjoy it. If this is your first time listening to Beginnings, I've been doing this for 12 years. I've talked to hundreds of musicians and writers and comedians and artists. Just a sampling. Mac McCaughan, Dean Wareham of Luna and Galaxy 500, Sam Prekop, Owen Pallett, Sadie Dupuis, Mira, Mary Timony. So if you like what you hear today, why not check out some other episodes? You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Andy Beckerman. And I gotta tell you, I got some fantastic episodes coming up, including a lot of Canadian folks on the show, including comics writer Ryan North and Front Person, featuring Catherine Calder from The New Pornographers. Who else is coming up? Diane Coffey. That was a really good talk. Oh, another comic writer, Kelly Thompson. So anyway, stay tuned for those episodes. But for now, let's talk to Carey. And I'm going to quick put a little raincoat on Mabel and take her outside. All right, have fun. I'm very excited to talk to you, but I could not find very much information about you online. So this will be a real discovery.
Right. Yeah.
Is that on purpose? Have you protected your personal life? Have you insulated it from interviews, or is it just that's not what people have asked you about?
It's probably not what people have asked me about. I haven't made a conscious effort. I don't see a clear delineation between the two, I guess. You know, it's probably that my personal life is not very interesting. So no one's thought to ask.
Well, I want to talk about, you grew up in British Columbia, right?
Yeah, totally.
I want to talk about that, but here's a question.
Yeah.
That I've thought about this a lot, because I've been listening to your music for, I don't know, since college, a long time.
Yeah.
And you have a very theatrical style of singing, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, did you ever do theater, or is this just kind of naturally how you started singing?
Yeah, I was the prince in Prince Charming in a play in grade 8 or grade 9. Yeah. I was quite bad. Especially leading, the rehearsals, I was just shite. But I think actually I kind of pulled it out at the last second. I remember my dad was just like, "Wow, you were phenomenal." He might have been lying, but I think that's that's essentially all I remember. Yeah, that's about it. I mean, I have never been in a formal drama program. I'm quite sure I only the classic, like I joined that play because there was a new girl in our school, and we called her a townie because she had a beret. We were like hicks in the suburbs, and she was the only kind of arts person in the school, and that drew my interest for reasons that I can get into, I think. So I joined the play. Of course, nothing, came of it. In part because I sucked. But I think I don't think it was ever on the table to begin with. Yeah.
Okay.
Sam. Her name was Sam. Yeah. We would follow her and be like, she's a townie. Oh my God, there's a townie here. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, please do go into that.
Not in a creepy way.
Sure. I didn't think you were like stalking her. I just, but like, what was it about her that did pique your 8th grade interest, your 14-year-old interest? Okay,
so I was just thinking about this because my parents weren't like artists. My dad was a very committed like guitar player, but he just kind of like he learned by ear. He wasn't part of a musical community, but my parents were part of a Baha'i community when I was very young. I don't know if you know what Baha'i is. It's like kind of like a new age. Like if you threw all the religions in a blender and you hit blend, the God smoothie that you would drink would be Baha'is, right? And so they're like, okay, so like everything's cool, but it all turns into this religion, this Baha'i religion. It was very popular in the 1960s in the city called Saskatoon that my parents grew up in. And part of the rise in the popularity has to do with some really influential painters in Saskatoon became very devoted Baha'is. And so there was something called the Emelake Workshop. And that's where these kind of, somewhat famous Canadian painters would go. And I think several of them became Baha'is. And my mom really fell under the influence of this one painter who was also a professor at the University of Saskatoon. And so when I was young, I grew up in the Baha'i community, and there was lots of, we would go to his art shows, So the art was secondary, but I think what I understood was that, like, works take place within a community and communities have like specific ethos, and I was kind of really attracted to that at a young age because it provided my family and myself with a sense of community. And then the 80s hit and my dad like fell in literally with the fucking Hells Angels. and things went sideways. And so I think we were probably actually excommunicated from that scene. But my parents always spoke about it very earnestly and compellingly as a kind of like a Camelot for our family. And so I think I always yearned to get back to be ensconced in some sense of a community with a very specific ethos. It didn't have to be a religious community for which like arts played some role. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, I think that's a big theme of the last like 40, 50 years is how the neoliberal age has robbed us of community, has like atomized us all and turned us all into these kind of like it's nice that I feel like I'm a good individual person, like I'm a singular person, but it's robbed me of these connections to other people. So I feel like in the last 40, 50 years, we're always constantly searching for community.
Yeah.
Always constantly searching for some kind of like connection with other people. And I'm wondering what exactly about Baha'i attracted your parents, if you know?
I think it really aligned with the kind of loose morals of the age, let's eschew judgment. Let's burn. First of all, let's fucking burn the old world, for very understandable reasons, and let's find something new that had very kind of universal values. My parents always spoke about the kind of, they didn't use these terms, but they spoke perhaps naively about the kind of anti-racist, very and also very kind of egalitarian ideals of Baha'i. So I think it was just a perfect belief for the age, they both been raised in religious households. So I think that they needed to have something that plugged that hole. Yeah. Interestingly,
like what kind of
grown up with lots of people in my, for lack of a better word, scene, are also ex-Baha'is. So there's some kind of weird, easy transition from a Baha'i to pivot into all ages hardcore. Yeah. There's something about it. Yeah. It's an easy pivot, I think. And so, I think maybe that kind of the duality of there's some kind of arts thing. There's some kind of let's tear down the divisions that bind us. Let's look for the commonalities. Very new age, very critiquable, because it's, I think, I know the Canadian version of it is extremely white, so, and there's lots of, it's an easy critique, but I also think it was, as I look back, it was kind of beautiful words to have floating around your mind when you're 5 years old. Yeah.
Yeah. Probably the only difference in terms of ethos between punk and progressive religions is aggression and anger.
Yeah, that's right. That's what sucks about Baha'i. There's no mosh pit. Yeah. So fuck it. Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah. So wait, when you were 5, what were these phrases that were floating around your head that were kind of
there's the classic little child's prayer. It's quite beautiful. I can't recall it. But I remember these litanies. So, I mean, you could make an argument that at an early age I was being attendant to rhyme and words on a page. I don't know. I certainly have never thought about that before, and it seems tenuous as I say it, but I don't know, maybe.
I think this is the theory that I go with on the show, is that our childhood is not linear. It's not like you do X in childhood and then X shows up in your art. It is that your childhood sets a certain kind of foundation that lets your artistic self grow out of that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's just the super foundation. In a way, for me, it's it's all there is, it's the tension between being and becoming is so fertile, I guess. Yeah. And the being is set up by your childhood, but also who I want to become actually probably very much aligns, with I don't know if 5-year-old me would have looked at, 47-year-old me and thought, what a scumbag, or what a virtuous man. I don't know. I don't know, but I think, I do feel this a kind of a moral compulsion to become a better person that somehow impacts the all of the negativity of the world, to somehow in my being diffuse that. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. That might be silliness, but it's in there. Yeah,
I don't think it's silliness at all. I don't have any good hard evidence, but I have a lot of anecdotal evidence from doing this show for so long that your ethical and your aesthetic selves, or your beliefs, however you want to describe it, are very intertwined. And so I think there is some deep connection between how you regard the world and the kinds of things you make.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, the true misanthropes probably have the harshest idealism. And the misanthropy gets formed when their ideals are constantly, humanity is constantly letting me down. I thought that before. Yeah.
So it seems like you were raised in a household or in a community. I mean, was the Baha'i, when you say it was like a community, like, did you all live in like a certain area together, or did you have your own home and it was like a regular church or synagogue or mosque where you went to a certain place to congregate?
Yeah, definitely. But like, there'd be summer camps. And we would, it would be the most glorious experience of like a long day's drive through the woods. And you arrive at this place beside a lake, and the kids can just run around and be free. And then sewn into that is the occasional recital or just contemplation of a verse or whatever. I don't know what my parents were doing. I have no idea. I just remember the lights and the grass and, the texture of the community, coming together, which actually kind of sounds like one of these like music festivals that like, it's maybe like how our kids remember. Oh yeah, I remember like my parents took me to some like camping thing. Right. And then there was a stage where there was some bunch of noisy shit.
Yeah.
But I didn't have to pay attention to that. Yeah. I just got to run around. Yeah.
And I had to wear those big headphones over my ears to protect my ears.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So wait, so you would go to these places. It's because it seems like, you are encouraged or even like, you are raised in a place where like you become sensitive to artistic thoughts or artistic, structures. I don't even know how to describe it exactly.
Yeah, that might be pushing it though. It was more of a backdrop, but like, if they pushed it too hard, if they said, oh, by the way, like, come contemplate this painting with me, I would be like, oh, right. Art is something that you're made to do and you don't know what the fuck is going on. And it's just an excruciating, thing that your parents just are like, so what do you think of that? What do you think of that? It was just these, I think of Otto Rogers was one of these painters that was very influential. I think he is like the Saskatoon kingpin. And I have memories of going to his art shows and just running around and like, it's just the blur in the background. But, it was kind of a beautiful blur. Yeah. So I really think just that it wasn't too overt or ham-fistedly thrust upon us leads into maybe a more enjoyable appreciation of the potential of it.
Okay. And then you said your dad ran afoul of the Hells Angels or?
No. He ran afoul of the Baha'i community. Yeah.
Wait,
he also was, he didn't join the Hells Angels. That's a different thing, but he definitely started partying. So my mom was one of the very first newspaper publishers, female newspaper publishers, if not the first in Canada. And so she was kind of plucked out of advertising and offered to be the publisher of a small town newspaper way up north. And my parents had this, so we lived on like a Gulf island where there was lots of Baha'is and very, very peaceful, kind of hippies, I guess, and we moved up to this kind of really harsh town. And my dad looked around for a social community and he said this is how he told it. He had to choose between the Dutch Orthodox Church or the Hells Angels. I know that's not true. I know that there was a third way. But, he's like, so sue me. I chose the Hells Angels, And, so different members of the Baha'i, like of our friends would come up to visit and see what our northern setup was like. And they'd be aghast when they met my dad's new friends, who were just like literally like manslaughterers. So I don't know. I think a lot of people, it's very in keeping with the narrative of like, you know, the 60s was this like Edenic, mythopoetic beginning. And then the 70s is a bit like a hybrid of partying and trying to keep those ideals. And then the 80s, like, you know, things get gnarly. And so things got quite gnarly for us and whatever, you know, as they did for many people, I think. And so at that point, that's when Baha'i is just out of there at that point. Yeah.
I mean, what was that? How old were you when that happened?
Well, I was probably about 11 or 12.
Was that jarring for you to like lose this community?
It was horrible. It was, we were, as kids, we were like, can't we please just go back? You know, and my dad wasn't able to articulate to his children, a 35-year-old can't go back to who he or she was when they were 21, you know? Just like if my son had been around when I was like super into emo punk and he was like, can we please? I'd have to say, I don't even know if that exists anymore. And I'm not welcome. You know? Yeah. So.
I mean, what, like, is your dad just like partying with these guys? Does he have a motorcycle?
No. Totally not. He was a very funny man, so he could kind of prosper in any kind of social circle, I would say. Yeah. And he had many. He had his fingers in many pies, but that was the one in this small town. And eventually, I think it was like my mom was like, you know what, we have to get out of here. This is, you know, it's a bad scene. So we did, and then we moved down to Victoria, which is a small city by like, where are you?
I'm in Los Angeles.
Okay, yeah. So like it's, you know, like a town. It's still a small town, but I guess it was a city of the, you know, maybe 200,000 people. And it's on an island. I think that my dad just kind of turned into a normal person at that point, as much as they could be. Yeah.
I mean, was he searching for something? Like, what was it about, like, the Hells Angels that filled that in for him?
Well, I guess, I mean, you're always, if you have, and I will say this is true in my own life, when you have been part of a community and you supplant yourself or you go somewhere else, you quickly are searching for that similar sense of community. And from his perspective, remembering that one aspect of Baha'i, that religion is non-judgment. So I don't think people go to hell in Baha'i. I might be wrong about that, but I think my dad was always like, so, you know, another reason the Baha'i is great is no one's roasting, you know, in the eternal flames of judgment and punishment. So in his defense, he would have said, well, the Hells Angels were actually less judgmental than the opposite. Again, I mean, I can't say, I was 11 years old. So yeah, definitely searching. And what he was searching for was just a continual replication, I think, of that very actualized feeling, and scene that, they were part of in Saskatoon. Now, as musicians get older, many musicians have a kind of their own like Camelot era, you know, like, okay, so that was a time when I felt like everyone was doing it. Everyone was in 5 bands. Everyone was doing this and doing that. Yeah. So it's funny how it's kind of similar. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like the early days when I was at UCB in New York in 2009, and you were on 5 indie teams, and Bobby Moynihan had just gotten on SNL, and there was like all this stuff going on. Like I can, or like when I was in a band in Pittsburgh.
Just to say, I don't know whatever you said. SNL is Saturday Night Live. I know that, but it's just funny. Like I guess we're probably in the same scene, but I still don't know what you're talking about. But yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes I don't realize like how deep I've gotten into some of the comedy nerd stuff. And then I talked to someone who's like, I have no idea. Like when I used to work day jobs in New York, and I would say UCB, and people would Upright Citizens Brigade Theater was like the main improv theater in New York.
Okay, yeah.
And the people at my job would be like, I don't know what that is. And I'd be like, oh, you know Amy Poehler on SNL? And they're like, yes. I'm like, it's her theater.
Right. Okay, yeah. So you just had to do that for me.
But like, it was a sense of community. And I think there was a lot of people that were involved in UCB, not because they wanted to do this for a living, but because they liked the community.
Totally. Yeah.
So I fully understand that.
Yeah.
And I feel like, and when you're outside of that, if you don't have, like, I feel like in Los Angeles, everything's very atomized and it's very difficult to get around. So like you are kind of on your own little island. Like my wife and I and our pets are here in our house, and that's primarily who we see, not because, I mean, we love each other, right? And so it's nice, but like also it's just tough to like see your friends, especially friends, like everyone has children now.
Especially if there's no like safe common venue that you can just go to and feel relaxed to be inside of. Yeah, that's something that I've been thinking about a lot. Like, wow, this is the first time in decades where I've been bereft of some kind of a scene, you know? And so I know for a lot of people, music is what the paintings were for me when I was 7 years old, running around with my crew, a beautiful backdrop. You know, but then when you take that beautiful backdrop away, you're like, oh my God, I sure do miss that. Yeah.
So when you were 11, did you try to find something to fill that in yourself?
No, I didn't know. I wasn't that self-aware. I wouldn't have been like, oh, I better replicate the sense of religious community that I had when I was a child. No, but I think I was innately drawn. It's so funny that we started talking about Sam the Townie, because I'm still really good friends with my friends from back then, and we definitely make fun of ourselves so hard for that. That was even a phrase that, you know, we were such hicks that someone with a beret would cause us to be like, what is that? Yeah. So I think that drew me into the theater experience, but I was but I didn't feel a sense of community there whatsoever. It felt very, not performative, but like, you know, when you're constantly having to perform or to try and be like somehow better than you are, that's not a sense. That's not a prerequisite for a sense of community. That sucks. Community happens when you're like, actually, I'm a shitbag or a fuck up or whatever, you know, and excuse my language, but you know, I kind of am who I am and you still accept me. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you understand the thing of being and becoming, like I'm trying to get my shit together or whatever, or to get a job or to whatever it is, show up in a clean t-shirt or, you know, so when I say shitbag, I don't mean like, you know, like an abuser. I just mean like, you know, like someone who just is like, does not know how to, not a type A, whatever the opposite of type A is. Yeah. So those are the communities where I felt really, at home in, is where you could be celebrated for your lack of executive function. Yes. Yeah. Your executive dysfunction. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, how was it then that you got into playing music, and even professionally, because that there is some level of ambition, and especially if you've been doing it as you have for decades, there has to be some level of like, well, I want to do this for real. That's inside of you. What
constitutes for real though? I mean, like money.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, yes, but no. Like, I don't actually mean that. Like, if you're making money for it, you're like making art. But I do think that there is some level where like you could have just been like someone who like, you know, picks up a guitar every once in a while and fiddles around on it and is like, and that fulfills you. But there's something where you're like, no, there's something inside me. I want this to be out in the world. And then when you do, like, when it is part of your like profession, it is part of your identity in some way, deeper way than if you were just fiddling around. And I think that's what I mean.
Yeah, I know. I just want to challenge the thinking around profession as being like, you know, the thing that you do exclusively as a means to make money.
Sure.
Because that can, I don't know, I feel like that's a poisonous route for some people. And it has been for me. My most miserable times making music was the times when I felt like I had to hustle. And hustling is fucking anti-community, man. Hustling is like you would smother your entire scene for a gig or whatever, you know, like it's gross. And I feel like there's a whole, we're talking about it. There's a whole, you know, I think it's so hard to be an artist that hustling can be seen as an acceptable path to take, but it's pretty self-destructive too. You know, you literally are burning all the bridges around you in an attempt to just, you know, keep your head afloat. And it might be better to just try and, like, I don't know, go work 2 or 3 days a week. So, you know, you're just as poor, but you then aren't, you know, you're not making your money off the back of someone else or just doing sketchy stuff, I guess. I don't know where I'm just kind of rambling, but I think there is.
I think I'm with you.
I think that there is like some kind of Venn diagram of, you know, hustling and community. And there's not much of an overlap between those two circles.
Yeah. I think that the thing that I'm trying to like differentiate between is someone who just wants fame for the sake of fame. That I find to be like a kind of psychopathic
totally,
desire.
Yeah.
Versus someone who creates art because they're like, oh, this fulfills me in some way. This is meaningful to me. The act of doing this is meaningful to me. And I want to put this out in the world so that other people can feel the same kind of thing I'm feeling. Right.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. That's what I'm talking about. And even if you don't make your living doing it, you're still, if you're making albums, I call that professional, like doing it professionally. If you're still like
actively, yeah, sure.
And I think that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Specifically for you, where did the desire for that come from?
You know, I don't really know. I think it's connected to just to feel it like I'm very much a late bloomer. I had no idea what I was going to do. My teen years were, you know, I was pretty dysfunctional. I was a pretty dysfunctional person. And I think, just kind of being part of a community and seeing what other people were doing, spitting out, really appreciating that. Like, wow, that song. Like, I remember when I was like 19, there was this band and people were talking about this band and they were like, they couldn't even, like, they loved it so much, they couldn't even get the words out of their mouth. It was as if, like, it was probably how, like, the apostles spoke about Christ. You know? Like nothing is the same, you know? And so they were telling me about, like, you got to go see this band play, you know? And of course, I went all prepped to be, you know, have this, like, religious experience. I thought it was okay. But you know, I really just have, like, I just loved the expression on people's faces and the way the words were tumbling out of their mouth, and just was so, like, taken by, I guess, the power and potentiality of being impacted by arts. And you know, it happens to me too, of course. You know, get floored by stuff. And that just, it's like a positive feedback cycle, I guess, within myself. The more stuff I love and appreciate, the more I want to kind of mulch on those, not necessarily like the influences, but just the feelings of, like, wow, you know, like, that was done to me or for me. And so, I don't know, it just kind of makes me want to just jump in to that energy.
Yeah. Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
But also, like, what else is there to do? There's literally nothing else to do, you know? You can only read for so long, you know, your eyes get tired. I don't know. I probably am not that good at hanging out. Unfortunately, I think if I was better at hanging out, like just, you know, going and sitting in the park or watching sports or, you know, just kind of low key hanging out, really bad at that. Then maybe I would be less inclined to be constantly producing things, I guess. But I just like, I got to fill up my day.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I have the like specter of mortality always like just sitting over my shoulder, like being like, you only got another like 40 years if you're lucky. So you better start making more stuff. Like every time that I think I'm like, I don't know if I want to work on whatever, the script or something like that. I get the old Grim Reaper just being like, come on, buddy, do it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, like having a daily practice means you have less moments where you're like, oh my God, you know, I just climbed this mountain. But it sure is fun when for me, it's such a joy when you have like a small cluster of songs, 3 or 4, and it feels like a wave that you're all of a sudden you're kind of able to surf, I suppose. You know, you understand the shape and the body and the energy of the project that you're working on, and you can kind of see where it's going to go. And you try and stay on top of it. It's pretty exhilarating, actually. And you're like, there is a part of me that's like, I made these things, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like I actually exist. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when I write music or whatever I do, like, it's always like, I'm trying to make something that I've wanted to see in the world that I haven't seen in the world for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And so there is that kind of enjoyment of like, oh, I was able to like manifest this into existence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Through like work.
Yeah.
Through your labor. Yeah. Not through your genius. Right?
Right. Yeah. Through putting my fingers to the keyboard or on the guitar or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you said you like had your teenage years were dysfunctional, what did you mean by that exactly?
Well, I mean, actually, you know, this is going a little deep, but my dad, like, you know, there was some pretty intense family effects from rolling with the Hells Angels. So there, for some years, I guess I didn't feel like I had much in the way of a dad because he was dealing with his own stuff. And stuff could include, like a addiction.
Right. I see.
Yeah. And for like various reasons, my mom wasn't really around more. She has like a memory disability, a very rare memory disability. And so that started, my parents are fucking interesting. Like I should I don't know, I should talk about them more. Yeah. Cause my mom was the publisher, right? So she's this like, you know, neoliberal star of the, you know, Canadian publishing industry, through her ability to sell ads because she's very effective at making real, authentic connections with people. This is like her superpower. While that's happening, she's having the kind of early onset of this really intense memory disability where she can't remember anything. And so you can imagine her workers are like, I told you that last month, like, or whatever, you know, and she's just so much anxiety, I'm sure, just trying to juggle those things. And eventually the demands on her at a time where there was no understanding of disability were so intense. I think she just had to kind of step out of her life for a while. And I think that, you know, that fucked me up quite a bit, actually, seeing my parents so like who I like still like love and respect so much, so like blindsided and all, like they seemed to have so much purpose at these, you know, really formative years of, you know, 6, 7, and 8. They were like actualized people, and then cut to 4 years later, and it's very opposite. They were like phantoms of themselves, you know, and I think that just, I didn't know how to deal with it. And so I was just kind of a shitty young man, you know? Yeah. I've since kind of, I've been very embarrassed about, like, you know, many kind of post-emo people being drawn to this, like, weird musical scene where guys got up on stage and ripped at their shirts and went, you know, and it's good to mock yourself or whatever. But I've also come to understand that, like, that was a time before there was so much social emotional awareness.
Yep.
And so it really provided, like, oh my God, without that, who knows, you know? So it was like, in the absence of social emotional language or understanding of what we're going through, it was a time when you would never have spoken to a therapist. That would have been like, you know, you would have been, whoa. That would have been scary and like, and just not at all on the table, because I would never have known someone to even know the number or whatever, and I wouldn't have had any money anyways, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah. So, you know, I think for a lot of us, emo provided a way of dealing with, you know, I don't know if I want to use the word trauma or however, small t trauma is now, you know, that term. But yeah, so I was very dysfunctional and didn't know what to do with. I had no sense of capability or ambition. And then, I don't know, I just kind of like came out of it. Maybe in my early 20s, and started like, you know, I was like writing jokes and writing plays. And I think I just had a sense. All of a sudden I looked around and I was like, I'm actually enmeshed in like a really interesting community of musicians and very funny people, all very dysfunctional, and very like, you know, not a lot of therapy going along, but a real like visceral sense of community. And so I don't know, I guess eventually I just was like, well, I don't know. I mean, I like painting, I like writing, but, I really, really, really like being surrounded by a wall of sound. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you know, so that brings me to this moment, really, you know? Yeah.
Was there an actual catalyst for this epiphany, or was it just like one day you like looked around and you saw that you were part of a community again? Because this is what I built together.
No. All that's just me looking back. Now. Yeah. I mean, we were just as likely, as soon as we realized we were part of a community, I think we would actively work to destroy it too. And just because it just seemed a bit too, I don't know, too functional. The 90s were weird. The 90s were an odd time. You have all these disparate influences. You know, I always think of those like the Mike Lee characters, like just, you know, guzzling wine and testing those around them. Lots of like kind of like eye rolling, wincy influences at the time, like the Beat Poets and then, you know, really, really loud, punishing music. I don't know. I mean, none of it really yells out community. It's just looking back and kind of seeing those patterns, really. Yeah. But there's never been a moment. Yeah. There's the only time I had that epiphany was about a year ago when I realized, oh my God, I'm not part of the scene anymore. And I kind of moped around for a couple weeks. Because even, you know, post punk and everything, all that's left now is just people who continue to make music, And I think when I look around me, a lot of the old rivalries that were very intense and visceral. I hate that guy because of the way he, holds his guitar, or his white belt is scuffed, or whatever, or he wore a white belt for too long, or whatever the hell. Now it's all dropped away, and now it's just kind of like, in terms of this, I still have a community of friends, but I don't have a scene anymore.
Yeah.
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 It's kind of interesting. Yeah. It's not a bad thing. It's just a realization. Oh man. And then, so I was thinking about scenes, and yeah, like I'm thinking actually pretty positively about them, that they, were, a pretty important, balm, BALM, on some open wounds. And just the importance that they play. And so that's why it's so important for people to like really excavate the problematic structures of their scenes. Because if I'm sitting here saying, oh my man, it was so important, it was life-saving or life-changing or life-affirming to be part of this community, and then you're like, but this community doesn't actually involve, support, or welcome everyone because of like its inherently white supremacist structure or whatever, that's pretty gross.
Yeah.
So I think so simultaneously you can extol them, and then that gives you more of a reason to try and, look for the ways in which they poisonously replicate the general culture at large.
Yeah. I feel pretty lucky that like when I was playing music in Pittsburgh, it was very much like based upon like, the foundation of it of the scene were like anti-racist progressive punks, and their kind of ideology infused itself. And so then when I went to like find other music scenes, and I found that they were just replicating like when I lived in Philly, like a lot of the scene there was just replicating like racist and sexist and patriarchal kinds of thoughts. It was really jarring and kind of alienating. And then I was like, I'm not going to be part of this. I mean, I was not self-aware very much then, but I just knew like I had this like animal kind of like allergy to what was going on.
Is Pittsburgh kind of geographically isolated?
Yes.
I mean, being there. Yeah. So Victoria was kind of geographically isolated too. Sometimes that can be a benefit. You can really develop your own distinct thing. I really love the idea of like that kind of naive moment when you realize like that the thing that you thought was so pure is actually just a kind of like a Xerox of the thing that you hated. I have this, my friend, when he first went to university, he really thought universities were solely dedicated to, revolution. And he was walking along the campus and with a friend, and he was like, what's that building over there, by the way? And his friend was like, oh, that's the business building. And he like dropped his books. He was like, here on this hallowed ground where we learn, Karl Marx, they have a business building. Like, he just couldn't even believe it. And I have this, and it always makes me think of like, there was this guy in Seattle who, is like a musician. I don't remember his name, but he was like a friend of a friend. And I commented to my friend, the friend of a friend. I was like, oh, I see this guy, like this guy's getting really famous all of a sudden. I see his name. Like I opened up a newspaper and I saw his name in the newspaper. And my friend was like, oh, he hires a publicist. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, what is that? And he's explaining, oh, it's a guy, it was a guy, this musician pays to get his name in the newspaper. I just was like, I just couldn't believe it that I would know someone that did that. Of course, we have publicists now and whatever.
Sure.
Yeah, all that stuff. But I still kind of love that moment of like, are you kidding me?
Oh, yeah. Oh, when this business revealed itself to me, because there was someone who my wife's a stand-up, and we were both like, how is this some person had been they were a couple years out of college, and suddenly they were like a big name, and we were like scratching our heads like, how did this person pull this off? And then we found out like right out of college they hired a publicist. They came from money, and they hired a publicist, and that's whether they had, we had this like vision in our heads that like, oh, if you're talented, certain people will like boost you up and then you become a name. And instead it was just like, no, there's a machine. And if you are able to either have like a famous parent that like puts you into the machine, or you have enough money to pay your way into the machine, it can do that for you.
Ways into the machine. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's like,
I wish there was a visual of just all the ways to get into the machine, so you could at least pick. At least you knew, okay, so this is how I'm going to get into the machine.
I mean, my wife and I are very much about like, let's just be friends with the kind of people we want to be friends with, and then hopefully that will do what it's supposed to do.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think you tend to have a longer shelf life.
I think
at least, you know. Yeah.
I think so. But like, in your teenage years, it seems like, again, this is the in reconstructing your childhood now, right? It seems to me that like between your parents having to deal with their own trauma, right? Yeah. And moving away from the support system, both in Baha'i with the where you were originally, and then in going to Victoria, right? It seems like you were kind of like unmoored. But like, yeah. So like, what were you doing in those, was there anything that like, besides like the one theater production you were in 8th grade, like what were the other things you were doing at that time, or what gave your life meaning in those years?
I think in Victoria, it was the kind of, the alternative counterculture was, really, centered around skateboarding at the time. So that's how you would meet freaks, is you'd roll around on your skateboard. And it was a time when it was actually kind of dangerous to skateboard. There was still headbangers, and they would hunt you and chase you, which created instant solidarity amongst the men, it should be said. Within this whole, I cannot say this quickly enough. This is a very patriarchal scene with its own toxicity, but we weren't aware of that. We were too stupid to know. So at the time, it just felt like, okay, like we are the persecuted, and it created a real sense of solidarity between me and some friends that just happened to be like, we just kind of grew up in the same neighborhood. And we just maintained that friendship was so deep that we're still like 30 years later, still very good friends. That's probably beyond my parents. That's the bridge that gets me alive into my 20s, where I meet my life partner, Mel, who I kind of, at that point, I shed the layers of anger and toxicity, for whatever reasons. I don't know. It's not like Mel did it for me. It just kind of happened, I guess. Yeah. And so so my oldest friends create this just, I guess, level of care, and acceptance of my own dysfunctions, that get me into a position where I can properly be in a relationship, I guess, and Melanie and I just kind of end up building a life together. And she's the drummer in the band too, so, there's always been two people in this long running music project. Before that, I mean, I hadn't played music for 4 or 5 years, I think. And then I have this short running band, and then I meet Mel, and then I'm like, okay, you actually have really good rhythm. Let's start a band. And then, yeah.
Did it start off romantically, or was it?
It starts off romantically. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. She didn't, I had no inkling of her rhythmic possibilities. Yeah.
So like your creative I don't want to say process. I hate that
Yeah.
word, but like your ability to be creative, how does this change over this time?
It's a good question, because there's always this duality of like really earnest, dark, like this is my therapy art, and then it's binary. There's like my funny play, which is like so stupid and like, about a baboon that runs the railroad, or, like just kind of like a bad Simpsons episode, and there's like zero connection between the two. And I think this band allows it, like, the tension is the synthesis between the things that I find funny or absurd or odd and the things that continue to just be, haunt me or pin me down with, terror or anxiety. And that's enough of a tension to create, oodles upon oodles of, that's kind of my filter too. I mean, everything that I remember, every story that I have has an element of, deep pathos and deep humor.
Yeah.
And so there's this, I mean, like a lot of art and artists are like this. Yeah. So, finally I'm kind of able to connect the two, and it makes a little bit more sense, or just gives me more energy, Yeah. Cause it feels right and it feels real for me. It's that's kind of how I interpret. It's my filter. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when did you start kind of unraveling all this? Like, did you get into therapy at some point? Was it just you naturally started to?
No. I mean, I just feel like it's what you did. It's what one did. When I was 21 or 22 or even 18, it was just completely like, it's what a person did. You would just like, maybe because we were so geographically isolated, there wasn't a ton of bands coming. So it was really incumbent upon people who lived there to just make your own music, and for example, or write your own play or whatever, and this is pre-internet too, right? So it wasn't just like, oh, I could just like, I can just go and listen to the history of recorded music. It was even hard to listen to music in a way. And the more knowledgeable you were about art, the more cultural capital you had, right? Mm-hmm. So if you were someone who like owned a Coltrane record, holy fuck, you were so cool. Now it's just like, what? You went to Best Buy, but so that was one way, was just to be knowledgeable about things. But I didn't have a cool cousin, or, my parents like were Baha'is and then Phantoms, like super not cool. So, another way to exist and maybe to get invited to the party where the Coltrane record gets played or whatever, is to be a maker of things, I guess, So I think I was in my kind of like thirst for things, like, wow, it's so cool to meet people who know about things. They've been to places and they know about traditions. You had to do things in order to be able to like hang out, I guess. Yeah. So that's one of the impetuses, there's probably like, we could do this for hours. There's probably 50 reasons, I think that was one of them though, is just to kind of, have a way in.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But there's a point, I'm guessing. Okay. Question mark. There's a point where like you start to become self-aware about the art you're making, right?
You like that. I'm like, whoa, this is good.
Or just like you're like, I'm making an intention. Like I don't think I ever got, when I was playing music, I don't think I ever got to the point where like beyond like, hey, let's make a drone song like Yola Tango or something. Like I never got to a point where had been doing it for so long where I'm like, oh, I know what I want this to be. Or like there was always like maybe something in my head and I was trying to like get it out there, but it was never like with a script. I'm like, oh, I know the tone I want and I know what the feeling I want the person to have. And I know all this kind of stuff that I want to translate into a script now because I've been doing it for so long.
It's just so satisfying to be able to impose your own little twist on the form of something, though.
Sure.
Yeah. To be like, hey, most people would repeat this for 4 times. I only do it for 3. It's like, it's not super important, but it's incredibly satisfying.
Yeah.
So at what point, I think very early on, but this also comes from like the ethos of my time, which is very much like the myth of the eccentric individual who works alone, the genius will come out of nowhere. It's so romantic. It's so ridiculous. And it goes against everything that I've just been saying about community. But I think the desire to twist, that for sure comes from growing up in that era where it was very, very important that you would have some little trace stamp of your own eccentricity and individuality. And it's like, as ridiculous as all of, that era is, there is something to be said as like, okay, well, if it's not going to be somewhat new feeling or new tasting, why do it?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. I've never like figured that out where I'm like, if you are like, I mean, I guess I do know why. Because you're like, I want to just be part of the scene. I don't have anything new to say, but I do want to be part of the scene, or like, I'm just doing this for fun or whatever. I think there's some other, but like to be someone I think who is making meaningful music there has to be that twist that you talked about. There has to be that little something, whether it's lyrically or musically or what, like there has to be that for it to rise above the din.
Well, what's so fascinating is there's so many people who make really interesting art and music with it. There were our own little individual twists. It fits within very recognizable genres or, pathways, but it doesn't take much actually to make something your own. Yeah. But I also don't really know what that is. I couldn't quantify. There's some things you can't quantify what it is that makes a me song a me song.
Yes. I think at the heart of a lot of this, I don't know if I want to like make a blanket statement like all, but definitely a lot is, I think, an obsessiveness. And if you're obsessive about whatever your art is, you will eventually, it'll transform into a unique thing. You will find that twist. It's true. You have to really you just have to be thinking about it all the time. Yeah. And you just have to be like, when I'm done a record, I love being done a record, not because I don't have to work on a record anymore, because I get to start working on a new record. It's so amazing. It's like, oh man, that old thing is cleared away. And like I said, I get to kind of organize a small cluster of works that then turn into a recognizable shape of something. That's why I love albums, is that they are, that you get to put disparate works together into this contextual folder, I guess. Yeah. Even like on the computer, I love putting things in folders. Yes. Oh yeah.
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 Like, that's where you should go. Yeah.
Yeah. Obsession. Okay. I'm going to also throw this out. Compulsion. Like there's stuff like, I mean, this is the dumb version, but there are times where like there's a joke that's going around in my head and I can't rest until I just throw it on Twitter or something like that. because it won't stop going around my head. I'm like compelled to just like put it out into the world. It could be dumb. I mean, it's probably dumb, but like,
yeah. So then, do you ever put it out and you're like, "Oh, I wish
sure.
that,"
and then I delete it, but it's out of my head. No matter what happens after that, it's out of my head.
Yeah. That's the thing I appreciate about music versus a tweet, which is like some tweets are beautiful and brilliant, but they don't take very long to push out. And so you can have deep regrets that, like I've written some horrible songs, I'm sure, where I like, whew, good thing that took 2 years to make because I had 2 years to realize it was garbage. Yeah.
Oh, man. Thank you so much for joining me. Just an absolute pleasure to talk with you.
Sure. You too.
How do you feel?
Good enough.
Good enough?
Yeah.
Do you feel like we got to the heart of it?
Yeah, there was one thing I wanted to tell you because you told me the loose theme. I was like, okay, so I just was thinking about. I don't have a great memory, so I was trying to remember some things, and I remembered, okay, my parents were Baha'is, and I had some memories about that, and I remembered that painter's name, and I remembered a story that because the precocious moments are important, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So in grade 6, I wanted to be a writer. That was the other thing that we never talked about, and I was really into Ernest Hemingway. Because my dad had a bookshelf of like American classics, and I was able to read Old Man and the Sea, which, because of its clear language, I was able to get through. I wouldn't have been able to have said anything about it at all, but I was quite taken with the idea of like, I could do something like that. So I wrote a story about like a young man walking upon a beach, and he gets lost on the beach, and he spends a night in the hut with an old man, and the old man it's his last night on earth. The old man's slowly dying, and the old man speaks out life wisdoms, right? While the waves crash. And then when kind of Yoda style, like the old man's body disappears. And then when the young man wakes up in the morning, the old man's body is gone. It's called Dead Memories. Pretty dope, eh? Pretty dope title.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much there.
Yeah. So I remember really enjoying writing it because I think I like images. I was like, okay, the gray sand, the brush on the cliffs, kind of I think a Californian beach was kind of what I was thinking of. The noisy waves coming in, some kind of, I enjoyed describing the darkness of the hut. And then when it was time to talk about like the old man's wisdom, it was really difficult because I was 11 years old, but I remember like, it just kind of like throwing together kind of like Yoda-isms, I guess, just garbage. But I remember my parents and the teacher saying, like, wow, like you really captured like some life wisdom there. And just kind of like secretly being like, oh my God, if you knew how, like what bullshit that was. And I was thinking, it's kind of funny. Like, how do we know when something is wise? How can we differentiate between when something sounds wise, which would be me writing, I wish I had the story. Because they might have just been like, it was so cringy. We just have to say something about it. But yeah, so Dead Memories. I think there is an aspirational element to what I do. Like, it's a compulsion to keep moving to try and make something great. And I think the thing of pulling down Old Man in the Sea and reading it and then writing some, really not very good story is a kind of it sums it up in a way, it's like, and if you do that enough, maybe you do end up writing something that doesn't just sound wise, actually is wise, or, maybe you do something great just tumbles out of you. You know, you just have to keep working. Yeah.
That actually seems like a lovely pace to end.
Yeah. Dead memories.
Dead memories.
Flap. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, thank you. I really do appreciate it.
Cool, man.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.